Hey folks, David Chen here from Decoding TV. Recently, George R.R. Martin made a blog post in which he criticized some of the decisions that were made in adapting his book, Fire and Blood, to the TV show House of the Dragon. In the following video that you're about to watch, Patrick Klepek and I discuss why he might have made this blog post, what was going through his mind, what he's trying to accomplish, and we speculate on what exactly is going on here. But in the time since we recorded this conversation, new developments have occurred. Specifically, George R.R. Martin has removed the blog post, and furthermore, there has been a statement that has been issued to Variety from HBO. According to Variety, an HBO spokesperson responded to Martin's complaints, saying, "There are few greater fans of George R.R. Martin and his book Fire and Blood than the creative team on House of the Dragon, both in production and at HBO. Commonly, when adapting a book for the screen with its own format and limitations, the showrunner ultimately is required to make difficult choices about the characters and stories the audience will follow. We believe that Ryan Condal and his team have done an extraordinary job, and the millions of fans the series has amassed over the first 2 seasons will continue to enjoy it." So that stuff has happened since we recorded the conversation you're about to watch, and who knows, by the time you're watching this, maybe other stuff will have happened, but I just wanted to let you know what's been going on. Anyway, here is the chat as we initially recorded it. I think it's still relevant and still worth considering. Enjoy.
Preach.
A few days ago, a bunch of news sites wrote up this blog post from George R.R. Martin, the creator of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. I mean, the book on which House of the Dragon is based, we should say. And here's a headline from Hollywood Reporter. George R.R. Martin says he'll reveal everything that's gone wrong with House of the Dragon. Here's the article. George R.R. Martin is suggesting he's about to go Dracarys on House of the Dragon.
Okay. Oh, boy.
He posted an eyebrow-raising message on his
boy.
blog Friday saying he's going to reluctantly describe what went wrong with the series. Innocuously snuggled into the bottom of a blog post about a Santa Fe festival, Martin added, "I do not look forward to other posts I need to write about everything that's gone wrong with House of the Dragon. But I need to do that too, and I will. Not today, though." Martin added on a more personal level, "I have had a pretty wretched year as well. One full of stress, anger, conflict, and defeat. I need to talk about some of that, and I will. I will. I was away from my computer traveling from July 15th to August 15th, so a lot of things that needed saying did not get said." So this set a lot of Game of Thrones fans, their tongues clucking, because a lot of people were like, what is going on with what it is that George R.R. Martin is talking about here, right? Like what he is theoretically gonna light shit up about House of the Dragon. He's angry. He's unhappy with how House of the Dragon has gone. What is he going to talk about? And initially, this segment that we're recording right now was going to be us speculating about what that is, or kind of reflecting on the fact that he even feels the need to say this. I go to check George R. R. Martin's blog before we start recording, and literally within minutes before we started recording, he actually posted what I assume is the first of multiple missives on this topic. So he posted an article at his blog, georgerrmartin.com, where he wrote a blog post called "Beware the Butterflies." That's the title of the blog post. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's very long, and I will say I am not going to spoil anything from future seasons of House of the Dragon, but I am going to spoil something that happens in the first couple episodes of season 2 of House of the Dragon to talk about this, right? So, like, if you don't want to be spoiled in the first couple episodes of House of the Dragon season 2, skip forward to the next segment.
Well, and it's like he, had previously, as the season was airing and the event that you're about to get into, like, had mentioned he was like really well shot, very tense, have some issues. Like, there was groundwork being laid about this specific scene that seems to then lead into criticisms from himself about the season or the series as a whole.
Yeah. So in season 2 of House of Dragon, what happens is Daemon Targaryen, he is team black. He's against team green. And he sends in these 2 assassins named Blood and Cheese into King's Landing to kill one of the sons. And Blood and Cheese find Helena, who is the queen, and they find her 2 sons. Now here's the thing. In the book, there's actually 3 children. There's Jaehaerys, Jaehaera, and Maelor. And Jaehaerys and Jaehaera are twins, and Maelor is younger than them. He's 2 years old. The other twins are 6 years old. And in the book, Blood and Cheese force Helena to choose which one of her sons to be killed, or else all of them will be killed. Right. And there's some differences in like how Helena approaches the situation. She offers to sacrifice herself in the book. Apparently, that doesn't happen in the show. And so there's all these little differences in the interaction, but eventually she to save the life of the twins, Helena names Maelor, the youngest child, to die. Right? She's like, "Hey, I want you to kill this youngest child." And then what happens is uh, Blood kills the older child instead, like directly against what she asks him to do. It's like a very cruel, upsetting scene in the book. One of like red wedding level upsetting of like, you force a mom to name one of her children to die, and then they kill the other one. That did not happen in the show at all. In the show, she doesn't even have a younger child, Maelor, right? So, and they ask her to choose a child, to like identify a child, and then she does, if I recall correctly, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no Maelor in House of the Dragon. I'm reading here from the blog post. Blood can't seem to tell the twins apart, so Helena has to reveal which one is the boy. Instead of offering her life to save the kids, Helena offers them a necklace. Blood and Cheese are not tempted. Blood saws Prince Jaehaerys' head off. We are spared the sight of that. A sound effect suffices. It is a bloody, brutal scene, no doubt. Then he continues, I still believe the scene in the book is stronger, end quote. And he talks about why he thinks, the book is better, the way the killers act, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that was a big change from the book this season. And we talked about it in the Cast of Kings and all that stuff, and kind of the implications behind it. George R.R. Martin in this blog post then goes on to explain that not having Maelor as a presence on the show has all these ripple effects that I'm not going to get into because they're spoilery of the future books, right? Like future stuff in the books. That basically by removing this character of Maelor, and therefore like that changes this entire Blood and Cheese scene. It also changes a bunch of other stuff that we haven't even seen in the shows yet. And not only that, but as he writes it in the blog post, he doesn't understand how any of the stuff that Maelor impacts is going to have the same impact without Maelor having existed. Again, the youngest of Helena's children. So that's the summation of like this blog post as far as best as I can do it. And then he says at the end of the blog post, there are larger and more toxic butterflies to come if House of the Dragon goes ahead with some of the changes being contemplated for seasons 3 and 4. So what he's saying is removing Maelor, that created all these ripple effects. And then they're going to make other changes that are going to have all these other ripple effects, and I can stay silent no longer. Patrick Klepek, what's your reaction to all this?
Congratulations, George R.R. Martin. You've entered your Stephen King era of being an old cranky author. Like, you found your shining. It's this. It's House of the Dragon, the thing that you're going to bang your drum about. I mean, look, HBO, by choosing to remain extremely cozy and with George R.R. Martin, like with the creator of this world, of this franchise, all its spinoffs, all its associated characters, you invite the fact that they can be like more authoritatively critical of the work, as opposed to an adaptation which where, well, at an auction house, like, we bought the rights, like, goodbye to the author, like, we're going to go, we paid you a bunch of money, now we're going to go do what you want with the work. And so I think that's part of what makes this feel a little bit different than just understandably an author taking issue with an adaptation, is the fact that there's been a lot made about like HBO really championing and like wanting Martin to write scripts and be creatively involved with like, how do we expand this world? Like, what parts of the world should we expand? And so for him to step in, in the midst of 2 seasons, right? Like, season 3 is supposed to go into production sometime early next year, probably come out summer 2026, based on the way you and I speculated about how the production would laid out. It seems, well, I don't know I can't tell if it's calculated or not. That would be my question to you. Does this feel like an author had a bad year, emotional, feels very close to this particular change and its implications? I think he puts in the blog post, which I didn't read in totality because Martin was at least nice enough to say spoiler alert.
Yeah,
for,
he
like,
did. He did put a little spoiler about like if you're only a show watcher.
Unlike Game of Thrones, and I do wonder, and we get into this, whether there's a different calculation on his part where how can I criticize what the showrunners are doing when I myself have not finished the work, whereas Fire and Blood, which is what House of the Dragon is adapting, is a completed work that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and thus Martin then feels a little more authority to come forward with changes that he disagrees with. Seems like a lot of fireworks that ultimately I'm not sure is going to. I can't tell if this is going to result in Martin cutting ties with HBO and HBO just pressing forward with a world that is financially very important to them, or this is sort of, look, Martin's kind of a weird dude. Like, he just is. Like, let him have his release valve. Like, whoosh, he gets out here to write his blog.
Right.
And, like, he's probably still going to be blogging about the House of the Dragon season 3 for good or ill. I mean, the last thing I'd say before I turn it over to you is this happens with works that become bigger than the author. House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones. Martin made it. He crafted this world. It has escaped him, which is all art. But like, it's just a piece of pop culture that is beyond just what his disagreement is with a particular storytelling choice. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know that we fully understand exactly what is going on here. It could be a combination of things. So here are some things we know, right? Is that, as you indicate, he has not finished the final books of the Game of Thrones series.
Will not finish, I think is what you meant to say.
Wow.
I'm a reporter. I work with evidence. Show me the pages.
Ouch. One of my favorite reactions to this whole series of George R. R. Martin's posts was somebody posted the scene from Logan Lucky, where did you ever see that movie Logan Lucky?
A scene that gets funnier with time. I personally, as someone that likes, broadly liked the show, ending aside, did not read the books, but feel bad for like the book fans that have not been able to see it completed in the form they fell in love with it. But if we're looking for a joke to get funnier with time, and do we need Game of Thrones to be a Song of Ice and Fire to be finished, or this scene from Logan Lucky to get funnier with time?
Yes.
I'm just not sure how to weigh these two, but you should explain the scene in question.
Yeah, so Logan Lucky is a movie that came out 7 years ago. And so it must have been shot 8 years ago, essentially.
Masterpiece of a film. Love that movie.
Great movie. And during the movie, there is a prison riot, and the prisoners have demands. And one of the demands is that they want all the books from George R.R. Martin's Game of Thrones to be like added to the prison library. And and there's a very protracted sequence where they're negotiating the demands, and then the prison warden says, "Hey, yeah, we got all the demands, like all that stuff is fine, but FYI, there's no Winds of Winter, like that book doesn't exist yet."
The Winds of Winter and Dream of Spring have yet to be published, so those aren't available.
No. And one of the prisoners says, "That's impossible because like I heard people talking about stuff that happens in that book," and he's like, "Well, apparently that's from the that's the Game of Thrones TV show." And this whole dialogue happens in the movie itself. Of like, that's from the Game of Thrones TV show. That's how they know all the plot details. And the prisoners like don't believe.
George R.R. Martin was supposed to deliver the Winds of Winter to his publisher over 2 years ago.
Well, Game of 7 years ago, Game of Thrones is at some of the height of its popularity, right? Like before the critical downfall, it's the kind of joke that if they made Logan Lucky now, like they wouldn't put it in there. It's a pop culture joke that works, but part of it is a function of the time that Logan Lucky was made.
Well, they did not know how timeless that jook would be.
Oh my God.
They did not understand, right? But yeah, I saw people posting this in reaction to George R.R. Martin's kvetching about how House of the Dragon changed things. Here's some stuff we know, right? My understanding is George R.R. Martin was not super deeply involved with the making of those final seasons of Game of Thrones. He did provide a sort of outline or story guidance to Benioff and Weiss about like where that story was going to end. And as far as we know, they followed most of it, right? Like the broad strokes of what George R.R. Martin is going to do with Game of Thrones. As far as we know, like that's what Game of Thrones ended up being. The execution is probably extremely different than what George R.R. Martin would do in the books if they were to exist. But like kind of the broad outlines of who ends up on the Iron Throne and where all the characters end up. My guess is that if the books ever come out, it's going to be somewhat close to what we saw in Game of Thrones. George R.R. Martin much more involved with House of the Dragon, as far as we can tell. Like he is an
Which
executive.
felt like a response
Right.
from HBO to some of the critical backlash to
Perhaps.
the end of Game of Thrones. Was like, hey, like we'll really involve the author this time, and like we'll be hand in hand with how we build this thing.
Right, and part of it is also like House of the Dragon is one of the biggest shows on TV right now. But when it was going to come out, people didn't assume that would happen. Right, people didn't assume that would be the case, and so I think that there's one of potentially many things going on here. One is that when you get closer to the work, you feel more passionate about it. Like he is more close to the work now, House of the Dragon. He's more deeply involved, and therefore he sees how people are altering his work, and because he disagrees with the decisions that are made, he takes it more personally now than with Game of Thrones. He wasn't perhaps was not quite as involved intimately, and therefore didn't feel like he. And also you pointed out, Patrick, like the books weren't done, and so there's only so much those people could do to honor his work. Here, it's like I've laid out a template for you guys, and also I'm working on the show. How dare you not follow what I'm doing? Right? Like there's probably some of that. I think there's also potentially, this is just wild speculation on my part, that when creative people get older, they start to reflect on kind of what their contributions are to the culture in a little bit more concrete terms. I think the one that I think about a lot is Charlie Kaufman. Charlie Kaufman once spoke out about how I don't know if he expressed regret, but he was very sorrowful about the idea that other filmmakers had directed his movies, right? Like Charlie Kaufman has, like, as of late, you may have noticed, like he directs all his own stuff now, right? Like, but earlier on in his career, Spike Jonze would direct his movies, and Michel Gondry would direct his movies, and so on. And as time has gone on, he said, like, "Hey, I really regret this because he's like, I am best equipped to manifest my creative vision, right? Like that's kind of what his attitude was, as far as I could tell. And I think for writers, that is potentially something that I could see happening is as you get on in years and you see people take your work and make it into something that to you is unrecognizable or bastardizes it. And as that happens more and more often, as you get older, you're like, hey, I only have a limited amount of time left to like have my visions realized in the world. Yes, it's going to be bastardized, but the least I can do is speak out about it. The least I can do is speak out against it. Again, 100% speculation. There's no evidence for anything I've just said. But if I'm like what you're seeing, right, Patrick, I think you'd agree, is somebody who is raging against the machine. Like this is not someone who is happy with how his work has been treated. Because otherwise, why would you speak out against it publicly? Like it's borderline unprofessional, right? And so,
I would say that like it actually is. It
actually is
unprofessional. It actually is unprofessional. it can be calculated, right? Like that's where I went back to like, it can still be calculated. Where like, has he earned the right to be like has he earned the right to step out and say this like and be but like I think he knows what he's doing. Like
he totally has. He totally has earned the right. I mean, he has contributed enormously to our culture. So he can say whatever the hell he wants. I'm not saying he shouldn't do it. I'm saying if I was working with him as a collaborator, I would not appreciate this blog post. And also, I think you've hinted at this, Patrick, is he could be doing this to influence the course of future seasons of House of the Dragon. He sees where House of the Dragon's going, and he's like, hey, I don't like where this is going, and I have the ability to change it. I have the ability to if I raise a big enough stink, maybe these people will be shamed into doing it the way I want to do it. Now, I actually don't know how that's going to happen, given that with this specific instance, they wrote Maelor, the young child, out of the show, and so like I don't even know how they're going to do it.
Which is, I mean, like it's an adaptation, right? Like, right. And I think I don't know how much you picked up on this in covering this with a cast of kings, but like when I watched Game of Thrones, like obviously a common joke was like, I can't remember what the names of all these characters are. That's so much worse in House of the Dragon. Like, it is just so difficult to keep track of.
Right.
Who
Many of them have the
everyone
same
is.
name, you know?
Many of them have the same names. Like, there's just, it's a difficult show. It's a show I've enjoyed quite a bit. Obviously, it's popular, but part of adaptation in sprawling novels is to condense characters to try and accomplish similar arcs.
Absolutely.
And the thing we don't know, and maybe we can't know until the show is done and you can compare the work side by side, is was HBO, Ryan Coogler and company, able to accomplish to the best you can in an adaptation, which is always going to be an imperfect translation because you are doing an adaptation. You are not doing a translation. And there's a little bit here of, well, what Martin wants is a translation of his work to screen. That's not how adaptations work. And there are good ways to do it. There are bad ways to do it. I'm not necessarily arguing that Coogler, HBO chose the best path. Like, they could make the wrong creative choices. They could make ones that were weaker for
Coogler?
Isn't it Ryan Coogler or not? It's Ryan
Condal.
Sorry, my bad. I knew it was Ryan C. The Black Panther director, like, secretly came in season 2. I knew it was Ryan C. My bad. Thank you for catching me there.
Yeah.
Condal and company, they may make not necessarily the quote correct decision. There aren't really correct. There are better and worse decisions in an adaptation, but we won't know that till we see. I think. Again, because I stopped reading the blog post to avoid spoilers, but, like, I believe Martin calls them toxic butterflies.
Yes, toxic butterflies. Yeah,
and I think the implication there is, like, because this one character in this one scene seems innocuous, like, that will have ramifications for how so many storylines would play out.
Right,
and that may be right. What just may also be true is that it's still a good story that manages to achieve the same themes and emotional outcomes of the original work. And part of what bothers me about the unprofessionalism of the blog is, again, not that he's not, but you can't be specific. You're being intentionally vague. Like, either, like, buddy, you're going to walk up to the line, like, step over it.
What do you think he's being vague about, Patrick?
What are the toxic butterflies?
Oh, I see.
Explain, like, the book's out. Like, he doesn't want to step over, like, maybe it's because of NDAs. Contractually, he cannot.
It's very possible that's coming, Patrick. It's very possible future blog post is coming where he talks about that.
Sure, Winter may be coming in a blog post, like, in future from Martin. But it just seems like either do the whole thing, explain your like actual critique of what the show's storytelling choices. This feels a little bit like ending with, like, toxic butterflies is a little bit of, like, well, you also wrote half of your series and then just stop. It's like, come on, like.
Well, I actually don't have a problem with that because I think you're right that it would be even more of a dick move to spoil stuff that's going to happen in the show.
And there's probably legal action that HBO would take as a result of that. So there are probably reasons, but that's what makes this such a, like, awkward crowbarring by himself into the process.
I have no issue with that, but I think you made a great point about the idea that you can adapt something and it can actually excise, like, tons of characters and still capture the spirit of what the thing was trying to do. I mean, just look at Game of Thrones seasons 1 through 5, for instance.
Full of that,
right?
Yeah,
right. And that's why I had all my speculation and wild tangent about, like, what's going on with George R.R. Martin's mind, because he has been around long enough to know that all the stuff you said, Patrick, is true, right? Like, he has been around long enough to know that, hey, this is how adaptation works. And why does he suddenly have a problem with it now? It's weird.
Yes.
It's weird that he suddenly has a problem with it now. And so I'm trying to like come up with reasons why that might be the case. And maybe, he had a rough year. He's getting on in years and he's trying to think through, like, what is my legacy? Is it going to be to leave these bastardized versions of my excellent, immaculate work around?
And the ones that will have, like, a bigger pop culture imprint, right?
Yes.
Like the adaptations of his work, which, like, obviously they were popular novels, like, they had a huge audience, but, like, it's the reason people are excited when things get adapted. Like, we live in maybe this will change in the culture in generations to come, but, like, TV, film adaptations, probably not. They'll live on as TikToks instead. But, like, the adaptations end up imprinting as, like, the interpretation of the work for better and, like, mostly for worse. But, like, that is just sort of how we remember these things. And so I can imagine a scenario, and I am sympathetic to this, that if he foresees a Game of Thrones 2.0, which is like, look, my bad. Thought I'd finish these books by the time that like the show was over. Didn't. And so I can't really be too upset over the imperfections in the storytelling because all I gave you was a template or like a bit of a roadmap as opposed to something concrete. Here, I have given you this. And if the audience backlash to my work, because the backlash to Game of Thrones as a television product then reflects back on the fan, the books themselves, even if that's not actually true. Those, it's Game of Thrones. It's his world, and like that series ended poorly is like seen as one of like the most disastrous television like conclusions of all time. Like that has got to hurt and sting. And so, if at least he has a sense of culpability and how that came out, and I think that is true by not finishing those books, he was culpable in the storytelling or lack thereof in those final seasons. Here, I can imagine, like, look, like
I'm not letting that happen again, right? Like,
or at least I'm going to make my feelings known ahead of time, so that if people look at seasons 3 and 4 and go, "Huh," they'll know that I had at least laid the groundwork for. I raised my hand. Like maybe they still end up being good and popular, but if like fans of the book, especially, like look at it and go, like, this really isn't resonant with what Martin was trying to accomplish, he'll have put a kind of stake in the ground and maybe just walked up to the line where it's probably still beneficial to HBO to work with him and like, build these worlds out together, but allows him to sort of like say, I gave it to you. I disagree with where you went with it, but like, don't let it be known that I said something when I didn't before, because I didn't really have any ground to stand on because the books weren't finished.
Right. Yeah. While we're kind of wildly speculating about what the hell George is doing here, I'll bring up one final theory, right? If you saw the movie Dune, there's this sort of race of superpowered priestesses called the Bene Gesserit. And one of the most famous lines they say that's been memed online is, our plans are measured in centuries, right? You can imagine a world where Game of Thrones is adapted again at some point in the future. I don't actually think George is thinking about this, but like you can imagine in like 30 years from now, people are
probably
like, hey,
not in his lifetime though,
yeah,
right?
Right. He's like, but hey, let's take another crack at this Game of Thrones thing. And it's like, oh, I remember the creator of that thing had like a real issue with how this particular thing, but I mean, we just saw Shogun adapted. That had already been adapted into a TV miniseries, and it was adapted again recently for Hulu and to great critical acclaim. You can imagine like 40 years from now, people saying, "Hey, let's try to make another Game of Thrones." And if that's true, then you could imagine that George R.R. Martin is kind of creating a template, like a guidebook to follow for future generations of creators. I don't actually think he's thinking that far ahead. Like this, honestly,
he seems cranky, and
if
he had
anything,
a bad year.
this feels extremely short-sighted.
It has this like like it feels very much just like a cranky old man who's going through something, and this was a way of kind of working through some of those feelings. Because I have to be honest, like when I obviously didn't read the second half.
You were not. Patrick has not been happy with George R.R. Martin's behavior in this situation.
Well, I would just kind of roll my eyes because, like, I guess.
Yeah. What is like, with your distaste? Because is it because like you don't like it?
Seems to amount to very little. I was like, you just seem like you woke up on the wrong side of the bed and decided to write a blog post. Like when the amount of hype, like I'm gonna let people know like what's wrong with the show. They killed the wrong kid. Like again, I didn't read the books. Like I don't know where it all goes. I can't sit here and speculate over like the storytelling ramifications. But it just seems like I was ready for a whopper. Like give me something juicy, and it's like I don't know. He kind of farted out a blog post.
Wow. Not very much sympathy.
Little literacy indigestion happening.
That's interesting. I thought you'd have more issue with the kind of like unprofessionalism of it. Of like, I just don't think in general it's a good idea to attack your collaborators.
Well,
like,
I agree, but if you're gonna make it juicy, I wanted a little more on the bone here. It just feels like it's not personal enough.
Yeah.
So
that's fair. That's fair.
But I think part of that is what has me falling back on the theory that like the crankiness, like again, like it's why I made the comparison to Stephen King, where like And it's interesting because Stephen King famously does not take, like John Carpenter, takes the check, largely is like, it's cool that someone wanted to adapt my work,
Right.
and otherwise doesn't have strong opinions on whether
Right.
he in fact, he's actually a good PR guy. Like, says something nice about he said something nice about the Dark Tower movie, and that's like one of the most abysmal adaptations of his work or any work that I have ever borne witness. It's a little personal to me because that's my favorite all-time favorite series. But like The Shining, for example, he has always took a shit on Kubrick's adaptation. He thinks he deeply misinterpreted the work. The Shining, the book, is, him working through his family issues and alcoholism and a lot of other stuff. But that's why I made the comparison to sort of the King and Kubrick moment, because I wonder, what is it about this moment now where it's like, you seem to have been pretty okay with just taking checks and overseeing the adaptations, but not feeling as though it defines you. And so that's where your point about getting older and what is it saying? I wonder if it's dawning upon him that the Game of Thrones-averse, or however you want to call it, and HBO's continued adaptations, which are not going to end, is turning into the legacy of Martin more so than the books. And he's struggling with what that means when they're not translations, they're adaptations.
The Stephen King example is a really good one for The Shining, because The Shining, obviously generally regarded as one of the greatest films of all time, right? But not an adaptation Stephen King favors, because he changed a bunch of stuff. It's a very different movie than
he removes all sympathy for the main, from King's perspective. Jack Torrance is me, an abusive, alcoholic father struggling with substance abuse issues, and then the movie's like, look at that piece of shit, he sucks. And so again, it's more, that's kind of singular in how King responded to an adaptation,
because 99% of the time King is super psyched
he's not as crass as Carpenter, who will just do interviews that says I love getting paid for people to make bad adaptations of my work. So there's different levels of sort of the cranky elder statesman sort of creative, and I wonder where we are on that arc. And
well, this is a particularly pointed I don't know if mean-spirited is the right word, but it feels very angry to me. It feels very upset to me. Right?
Maybe mean-spirited is the wrong word, but relative to a guy who sort of portrays his public image as kind of a Santa, jolly figure. Yes, I write all these dark and twisted fantasy worlds, but he generally comes across as, in his public image, I have no idea of his personal life, a fun, happy, loves that people love his this is an unusual turn tonally for how he has presented himself since he has stepped onto the public stage as a result of Game of Thrones becoming as big a deal as it was on HBO.
Yeah. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.